Pognettes, we've been warned of your kind. My people will take no commerce, but carries with it a compulsory religion.
No, I'm a master trader. Money is my religion.
Who is Hober Mallow? The third episode in Foundation's second season answers that question, even though no one quite understands why the Vault is looking for him. This is actually a good thing, because based on what we know about psychohistory, it doesn't really make sense. On Terminus, Director Cermak just goes ahead and says it out loud in case you were worried that everyone forgot how this is supposed to work. How could Seldon's math see that someone specific like Hober Mallow could even be born, let alone request him? Which is a real question because, as Polly points out, the Vault is a man, and it's literally made out of Hari Seldon. From what we've seen on screen so far, the name Hober Mallow was first mentioned by the mule in Gaal's vision. When he discovered that she was projecting her consciousness forward in time, he asked if she was from the Age of Empire before Mallow poked its eye. That does not explain how his name ended up on the Vault, but it does add a sense of inevitability to the character and his purpose. And at the beginning of the episode, Gaal is struggling with this same sense of inevitability surrounding Salvor's death. How does knowing what will happen in the future change the way you react to situations in the present? And Hari complicates that question further when he adds that it might not even matter because there may be infinite ways to arrive at the inevitable. After he diverts the Beggar to an abandoned Imperial mining planet rather than the Metallics world of Ignis, all at the behest of the Prime Radiant, Hari elaborates further, and that backs up all the psychohistory talk on Terminus. The plan makes small changes in the present to adjust large events in the future. Gaal is essentially trying to do it backward. She wants to invest in one small event in the future, the death of a specific human being, and apply huge forces in the present to try to avert it. When she suggests that Salvor did solve the first crisis, he counters that it only seemed that way. After all, every historical condition was on her side, and he contends that if it hadn't been her, it just would have been someone else. This is also something they bring up on Terminus, which backs up the idea that no one is special per se, because that's not how psychohistory works. That even goes for Hari, because it is his plan, but at enough scale even he becomes insignificant. And as these two continue to go back and forth, you can see where each character's frustration for the other is coming from. One other detail he brings up is that his life partner Yana, which was mentioned in the first episode, we saw a vision of her, helped him create, or in his words, helped him birth psychohistory. And he says in a way it was their only child. And he does add their only living child, which hints that they lost one along the way or something along those lines, and that there's probably going to be more that we'll learn about what happened to her in the coming episodes. When they get to the end of this little walk, they meet up with Calais, who appears as a real person outside of the Radiant. Gaal asks how that's possible, and Calais tells her that she can ask what that means when they meet up again, if the future allows that to happen. Hari doesn't know what to expect here, so he tells Gaal goodbye. He tells her that he gave control of the ship back to Salvor, and that if he doesn't return in 6 hours, to leave. And then the door closes and she's locked out and she has to walk back to the ship alone. This provides a chance for her to sort things out with Salvor, who knows that all this abrasiveness with Hari is more complicated than Gaal would like to admit. The right move is to leave him behind if he doesn't make it back in time. If you reverse the roles, that's what he would do, and that's what Salvor wants to do. But Gaal is still having a hard time with the decision. Hari was her idol and a father figure she thought she needed, and this revelation leads to Salvor getting a shot in that parents are never what you build them up to be. And it also sets up one of the character's most memorable sayings from the original book. Never let your sense of morals prevent you from doing what's right. I'm not sure this was the most elegant place to introduce this idea, but I still like it. It is a great quote that makes you think, and also because this tension that exists between Hari and Gaal is frustrating at this point. And Salvor is there to be our audience surrogate, to highlight the futility of the black and white thinking that she's bringing into this current situation. In the end, they do decide to leave, but before they do, the automated mining rigs on the planet start to wake up. They get out of the first close call and notice that the machines were distracted by something else. When they investigate that, they find that Hari's consciousness has been transferred into a body, which after a second close call, Gaal is able to rescue and get on board. This doesn't seem possible. I suppose it's probably a clone body. And to make things more confusing, Hari has no idea what's going on either. While they were discussing the mining planet, Hari mentioned that the Cleons were hollow men that hollow out their worlds. When Demerzel travels to the Lepsis penal colony, we get a real-time example of what that looks like. She's there to make Bel Riose an offer, and explains that Empire needs him to take his fleet to Siwenna to figure out what is going on in the Outer Reach. This is a character we're just meeting, and there are a few things the scene establishes about the general. Empire and Demerzel specifically realizes that he's the right guy for this job. The punishment he's endured for making a right decision that also made Day look bad is absolutely cruel, and included telling him that they executed his husband as a result of his decision. Regardless, we see that he is a negotiator and has a somewhat sober reaction to her threats, but then once she tells him that husband is still alive, he agrees to at least entertain the idea of returning to service. Before they go, there's a little Demerzel moment that stands out where she says, "I know hope is painful. You don't have to hope, just come with me." It makes you realize that most of what you know about Demerzel comes through her interactions with the Cleons. So I think it's always interesting to see how she operates when they're not around. On Trantor, Riose decides to go in front of Empire without cleaning up because he wants Day to see the man he's made him. Don't let that ragged appearance fool you though, because Bel still has his wits about him and quickly puts it together that Siwenna is a nowhere planet that would never really be a threat. Day tells him about Hari Seldon, his proclamations, and the rise of the Foundation, who he fears may become a threat, and why he needs someone he can trust to go find out. There's a tense private conversation here where they both test each other, which ends with Riose contending that he took an oath that Day is his emperor. He shows real restraint since you know he wanted to hit him. This is enough to get him a heartfelt reunion with his husband, and after they clean him up, it all starts to make a little more sense. After Glaewyn makes a fairly good case for running away, Bel explains a weak emperor needs a strong general. In his role, he feels like he has to protect the masses because the emperor sees his subjects as disposable. He says that with this Day in charge, for the sake of all of these people, I don't have the luxury of settling the score. All of what we see in this introduction amounts to a pretty likable character. And when he makes it to his ship, we see that that's how his people see him as well. This primarily comes through a conversation with his ship Spacer and their warm relationship. She plots a jump and they head to the Outer Reach, and we get a look at his fleet that appears to be impressive. There's a quick scene between Day and Demerzel where we see his reaction to the encounter as they sort of eavesdrop on Bel and Glaewyn making out, which is kind of weird. In that, you see him looking for validation for his decision, basically, and Demerzel massaging his scalp and letting him know he's doing a good job. Because we're still getting to know this particular version of Day, who seems to relish in his individuality, it seems important to notice that he's still dependent on Demerzel's guidance. And that brings us back to Hober Mallow, and I left this for last because there's a pretty significant tonal shift to this part of the story. Before we meet the character, we get a quick backstory as Polly and Constant are leaving Terminus. It turns out that Mallow trained for the priesthood, but it became apparent that he was a scammer who was more interested in selling religious paraphernalia and fake relics. We meet him on Korell, where he's impersonating another trader named Ponyetz, who has a better reputation, in order to get an audience with Commodore Argo. And as a quick aside, these are all familiar names from the books, which are pretty fun to hear. The Commodore tells him his people will take no commerce that carries with it a compulsory religion, which shows the limitations of the magic show approach that seems to be working on other planets. Hober says that as a master trader, money is his religion, and sets up an elaborate demonstration of a device called a castler, which swaps the position of two bodies in space. The Commodore knows he's a scammer and is trying to set him up, and Hober is actually just trying to steal a jewel called the Eye of Korell that he holds in his staff. The device actually works and he switches places and Hober's able to get back to his ship with the gem, but he can't get away before he's captured. What's interesting about this is how quickly you can win someone over when you can provide them with something they need or something that's exotic and useful like this is. This is a piece of tech that changes things for the people on this planet, especially the leader as we see. And as I mentioned, it's a very different approach compared to the Church of the Galactic Spirit. You can see how economic power through trade is another great tool for the Foundation to have in its toolbox. Polly and Constant arrive on Korell to learn that their mission to collect Hober Mallow is in trouble because he's about to be executed by the Titan's prick, which is a kind of fun way to describe a giant spike that drops through your heart. Facing that, Hober doesn't seem very concerned with the situation, which makes sense because he has a plan to escape. Polly, for his part, does try to talk to the Commodore, who isn't listening, and then after they use a mask to conceal his head, Hober uses the Castler to escape. We see that he removed the important part and concealed it in his mouth when he was removing the bracelet. He heads back to Polly and Constant's ship, where they're able to catch up with him just in time before he leaves and subdue him. And two things seem to be apparent about this new character. He doesn't fit the mold of what you'd expect Hari to be looking for. He's driven by money, but not in the way that might be beneficial to building allies that I was talking about before. He's drawn to the idea of easy money, and he doesn't appear to have any interest in helping the Foundation's cause. The other thing is that this all appears to be really attractive to Brother Constant, and you can't really blame her because overall he also comes off as a pretty likable new character. And that's pretty much it for the episode. Again, this was a solid episode. I think I preferred episode 2 over this one because there's no Sereth here. And while it didn't take me out of it necessarily, I can't say that I loved everything about the tonal shift when they went to Korell. It felt a little goofy in parts while still managing to have some genuinely funny moments in there. And either way, I liked both of these new characters who are quite different, which is nice because they both bring different things into the equation. Plus, I thought both actors did a tremendous job, which is in line with the other new characters that they've added throughout the season. I like a con man, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked that Constant liked the con man. It felt like another layer that contrasts the spiritual true believer thing that she has going on. On the Trantor side of things, Bel Riose feels like an immediately compelling character for different reasons. There's a clear contrast between him and Hober as far as their personalities and their situations are concerned, but then also the more important contrast between him and Brother Day. This sets up the idea of the weak emperor needing a strong general, and highlights the selflessness required for him to follow through on that. It all amounts to him being able to be a badass in unexpected ways. Surely the fact that he was locked away for years diminished the filter he might have had around the Emperor, but he still manages to walk a line there while landing some major blows to Day's ego. And the fact that the scene where he was reunited with Glawen landed so well is a pretty good indication that there's a lot to look forward to with this character. It was funny because I was a little confused about what Day was going for in the throne room, and then just sort of had to laugh when Demerzel asked him what he was hoping to accomplish. And he was just like, I don't know, I looked into his eyes and he looked strong. I guess we'd seen the other side of things, the overcompensating for his weakening grip and his concerns about that. But this bit where they were watching the intimate moment between the general and his husband, and she's rubbing his head trying to spin things in a way that he'll feel better, it's a little more than I was expecting. I mentioned that we didn't have any Sereth, and there wasn't much Dawn or Dusk either. But when he sends them away to talk privately with Riose, I feel like you can see that there is some resentment on their faces. Maybe they're getting a little bit tired of this guy. There were still a couple of those scenes where, for my taste, they add what seems like unnecessary action in an effort to create tension. But I have to admit that the mining robots still looked pretty cool. Hari getting a body is not a twist I saw coming. When something like this happens, I usually ask myself, what problem does Hari having a body solve? He won't need Gaal to carry him around in the Radiant when they're on remote planets anymore, but if you think about it, it does give him a lot more freedom. I mentioned the tension between these two was getting frustrating, and that's mostly because what Gaal wanted is something that fundamentally went against what Hari believed when he was putting the plan together. He wanted her to be the psychohistorian on Terminus, but didn't want her to know the whole plan in case she might disrupt it. And that was before he knew that she could see the future, which adds another level of complication. In her mind, he took away her choice, and in his mind, that was necessary. So right up until the moment when he was put into a body, she had some control over him, or at least where he could go and what they do. And now he has a choice about whether or not to leave her and Salvor and just go off and do something else. At least for the moment, they have the common goal of setting up the second foundation, which I think keeps them together. But the possibilities for everyone involved have been increased due to Hari's potential autonomy. And I don't imagine I'm alone in not buying the idea that the Prime Radiant is somehow sentient and that Kale is now a physical manifestation in the real world because of that. Like, I feel like there's a twist that's going to be revealed here, right? I mean, come on. So when I think about this body, I have to wonder about how the information was transferred and not just why someone or something would want to do that, but also what does that mean for its integrity? Can we even be sure that this is the same Hari, and so on? The whole thing brings up a lot of questions. It was nice to see some reminders about what psychohistory is and how it works. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I think there's a divide between what the show is trying to do and how people are interpreting that, and seeing it as them changing the spirit of the story. This episode felt like it had a concerted effort to define what the plan can and cannot do, and the understanding that the people involved have of that over a century after Hari's last appearance on Terminus. I guess that would take us into a brief books to show section. For the second week in a row, there were a lot of references in this episode. They have mashed things together, so there are aspects of several of the early stories coming out all at the same time here. But I feel like showing the effectiveness of the church in episode 2 and then introducing a planet that was resistant to that approach in episode 3 works fine as a way to introduce those concepts. Making Hober an outright con man is a bit of a change, but I think you could still get to the same place. Hearing all the names like Ponyets and Commodore Argo on Korell was fun, and of course, Book Salvor's quote about not letting your sense of morals prevent you from doing what's right is a great addition. That's a fun one to think about. And the big thing I've been thinking about over the last 2 episodes is inevitability. I know this is something that Asimov struggled with after he came up with the concept of psychohistory, because if it does mean that the math can read the future, which is something Bel Riose asked Brother Day about in this episode, then how do you write a story that's still surprising if it always circles back to just following the plan? He came up with some novel ways to address that, and the show seems to be adding its own while also following his lead, so I'm curious to see what happens next, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.